Включил.
Dear colleagues, let's start our meeting, but please take into account that this research was performed by the group of students of the second course, and they know only how to test simple hypotheses, but even with such econometric tools, it's possible to perform quite simple analysis. So, Svetlana, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Now can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Today I want to tell you about the research which my group mates Sergey, Ekaterina, Marina, Amina, and me did last year. Comparative analysis of Russian household expenses, regional aspect. Let's start with the research motivation. The research of dynamics and structure of consumer spending in Russia is really important for understanding the economic development of the country and in particular for forecasting inflation. The structures of consumer spending in different regions of Russia differ due to cultural, territorial, and infrastructural features. And also the crisis associated with the COVID-19 pandemic is different from all previous crises. So it's important to understand how it affected the consumption structure in Russia. The data on household expenditures for 2 offset years are used as weights when calculating the CPI, Consumer Prices Index. So, for example, to calculate the CPI in 2022, we need weights for the last quarter of 2019, the whole 2020, and 2 and 3 quarters of 2021. These weights are updated every year and are revised annually in January. So that is why the study of the structure of consumer spending of the households is an important research task. And here you can see our main research question: has the structure of consumption in the regions of Russia changed after the COVID-19 shock? Of course, there is a bunch of researchers on the topic of COVID-19 crisis, and I would not be able to cover all of them, but I will tell you about a few, which are the closest to our research question. Let's start with the French research, which showed that the lockdown changed households' consumption basket, and this strong and rapid change in the structure of consumption may lead to underestimation of inflation. Another research, Romanian, found an empirical evidence of new consumption patterns and evidence of change in consumption behavior caused by the pandemic. Their colleagues from Canada came up with a conclusion that consumers increased their use of off-premise dining services, such as different types of takeaway and deliveries, and also they reduced their dining-in experience. And the usage of off-premise dining services tended to vary across different socio-demographic groups. Of course, the highest number of researchers was made in China, and here also one of them, made up in Shenzhen, China. It showed the reduction trend in consumer expenditures in total, and also such trend in expenditures on wearing, recreation, and education. And here, the age, family size, and household income were significant to the expenditure changes. And one more research about the alcohol consumption during the pandemic. It shows us 2 possible opposite scenarios about the consumption of alcohol beverages. The first one tells us that alcohol consumption may increase, especially across men because of the stress experienced during the pandemic. But also it can decrease according to the second scenario because of the decreased physical and financial availability of the alcoholic beverages. Of course, I understand that we couldn't do such a detailed study on the consequences of pandemic in Russia. But we've tried to identify and analyze the main trends, and let's move on to our research. We used the data from a sample survey of household budgets conducted by Росстат. A sample survey is conducted on an ongoing basis in all subjects of Russia, and the unit of measurement is the household and household members living in it. It has a lot of variables, and on the slides you can see the main variables which we were using. They are food, non-food, alcohol, services, and out-of-home food expenditures. And together they result in consumer expenditures. We have chosen 3 years for the analysis: 2019, 2020, and 2021, like pre-crisis, crisis, and post-crisis periods. And the number of households was about 192,000 every year. But here it's important to say that the number of households under survey may vary from year to year or even within 1 year, because when one household drop out of the survey, the new one entering it under the same ID number as the previous. So the data do not have gaps, but we can't tell exactly the total number of households under observation. And the number of regions is 82, sorry. Also, we created some new variables, which you can see in the table. They are average expenditures for each category, and also later we did the average expenditures for each year. And the share of a certain type of expenditures in consumer spending. These variables were calculated as the ratio of the amount of expenses for a certain category to the total amount of consumer expenses. And also federal district, which was set manually by hand according to the composition of the federal districts in Russia. Here you can see the descriptive statistics for the variables that form the structure of household expenditures. Each year, the number of observations is near 192,000, as I said before. And if you take a look on the graph, you can already see some patterns. For example, the average share of spending on food increased in 2020 and fell in 2021, but still remained about the value from 2019. Also, it can be seen that the average share of spending on eating out of home has fallen since the start of the pandemic. We'll discuss these changes more detailed further. First of all, we have built the joint graphs of the density function. Now take a look on the picture. You can see the graph of density function for food expenses in Moscow. It's just an example. We decided to put Moscow in 2019 and 2020, where the blue graph refers to 2019 and the red one to 2020. And also such graph for the density function for out-of-home food also in Moscow. And we have noticed some features like the density functions for food, non-food products and services visually resemble a normal distribution, while the graphs of density function for spending on alcohol and eating out have a different look. They decrease and resemble hyperbole. We assume that possible reason for that could be that the values in these expense categories were very small, and also there were a lot of zero values. And such graphs were constructed for all regions, all categories of expenditures, and all pairs of years. Also, we performed Kolmogorov-Smirnov test to compare distributions, and the results were grouped into a table, which you can see on the slide. It shows the number of regions in which there were statistically significant changes in distributions and their percentage in the total number of regions. And here we can see that the alcohol consumption distribution functions changed the least across all 5 categories, and also that the most changes in regions were observed in 2020 compared to 2019. But the main conclusion here is that in at least half of Russia's regions, the distribution functions of all categories of expenses have changed from the pre-crisis period to the post-crisis period. You can see it in the last big column of the table. Also, we did t-test to test the hypothesis of equality of average expenses, and results were illustrated in a maps where red color means decrease in the share, green an increase, and yellow means that no changes were observed. Also, you can see here 3 regions which are highlighted in gray. These are regions for which the necessary data were missing in the dataset. They are Khanty-Mansiyski, Yamalo-Nenetsky, and Nenetsky autonomous districts. Also, under the map, you can see the table where results are presented numerically, like the number of regions with an increase, with no changes, and with a decrease. So now let's go back to the average food expenditures. And here we can see that the share of food expenditures in 2020 compared to 2019 mainly increased, except for Chukotka Autonomous District. You can see it on the first map. In 2021, compared to 2020, decreased, but mostly remained slightly above the level of 2019. So we can see on the second map that a lot of regions are highlighted in red, but the final changes were mostly positive. The dynamics of changes in the share of expenditures on non-food products are contradictory. There was an increase in the share of such expenditures in 2020 in Far East and some western regions of Russia, and also in southern Siberia, and a decrease in Yakutia and some regions of the southern part of Russia. In 2021, the downward trend has intensified, so we can see on the second map that the number of red regions increased. And as a result, in 2021 compared to 2019, the share of spending on non-food products increased in Siberia, the Far East, and some regions in Western Russia. The share of alcohol expenditures in 2020 compared to 2019 has not changed in about half of regions. And for example, in Siberian Federal District and the Kamchatka territory has increased. But in 2021, in these regions, there was a rollback to the initial state of 2019, where we can see it. In the second map, these regions which were green, they became red, and as a result, most of them became yellow. So no changes were observed. Now about services expenditures. The share of spending on services in 2020 compared to 2019 has mostly decreased. But in 2019 compared to 2020, the changes were ambitious. In some regions of Western Russia, Yakutia, Amur region, Transbaikal territory, the Republic of Buryatia, and Kamchatka territory, the share of spending on services increased. But in the Krasnoyarsk territory, Tomsk, Irkutsk, and Novosibirsk regions decreased. The final changes had negative or zero dynamics in all regions except the Primorsky territory, the Sakhalin region, and the Republic of Dagestan. And last here, the share of out-of-home food expenditures in 2020 has decreased in almost all regions, which is quite natural given the quarantine measures introduced. In 2021, the situation has mostly changed in the opposite direction, or has not changed. And as a result, on the last map, we can see that in 2021, compared to 2019, the share of spending on eating out of home increased only in Yakutia and in the Kamchatka territory. So we can see that final results are mostly negative. So we can assume that COVID-19 crisis and quarantine restrictions might have the negative impact on the restaurant business, maybe. The next part of our research was performing a regression analysis. The main task here was to confirm or reject the existence of a negative relationship between the median purchasing power parity income for each region and share of food expenses in consumer expenditures, so-called Engel's law. And also, after that, we checked the presence of such dependencies for other categories of expenses. The analysis was carried out with a division by federal districts and by years. And conclusions about the presence or absence of a dependence, as well as about its nature, positive and negative, were made based on the p-value and the sign of the regression coefficient. And now, take a look on the graph. You can see that all three lines visually have a negative slope, but it turned out that only in 2019 and 2021, there was a negative dependence between median income and spending on products. And in 2020, the dependence was insignificant. In the lower picture, you can see that the p-value here is a little bit more than 0.1. Also, as I said before, this analysis was carried out with a division by federal districts. And here it's important to note that the regressions were estimated only for those districts or group of districts where there was a sufficient number of observations. Here, one observation is one region. So the minimum number of regions in our analysis is 14 in Volga district and jointly considered Ural and Siberian federal districts. In the central federal districts, there are 18 observations, and in the North Caucasus and South districts, there are 15 observations. So that is why you can see here the Far East and Northwest federal districts, because there were not enough observations there, and we couldn't consider them together because they are far enough from each other. And now let's go back to the regression analysis results for food expenditures. Here we can see that with the growth of per capita income, spending on food products decreased both in Russia and, as we remember from the previous slide, and in the Central and Volga Federal District. And in Ural and Siberian, South and North Caucasus districts, there were no dependence. After analyzing the dependence of the share of expenditures on food products, we also decided to check such dependencies for another categories of expenditures. And here, let's start with non-food expenditures. Here we can see that all three lines indicating the dependence between the variables are almost horizontal, which means that there is no dependence, and also a p-value greater than 0.1 confirm this idea. As for regional analysis, with the growth of per capita income in Russia, the share of expenditures on non-food products did not change, and the only exception was the Volga Federal District in 2020 and 2019. In which there were a positive dependence between the variables. For all 3 years, there was a statistically significant positive relationship between median income and alcohol spending in Russia as a whole. And in regions, with the growth of per capita income in Russia, the share of alcohol spending increased in all 3 years. In Central Federal District, such a dependence observed only in 2021. And an interesting conclusion that in the Southern and North Caucasian Federal Districts, this dependence was observed throughout the entire period under review. And here I can assume that in the poorest regions of south of Russia, people mainly produce alcohol at home, like some sorts of wine, samagon, etc. Or they do not drink it at all. And in more wealthy regions, citizens can afford buying alcohol beverages in special stores. So maybe because of this, here we can see such dependence. During all 3 years under consideration, there was a positive dependence between the share of services expenses on and median income. And as for federal districts, also with the growth of per capita income, the share of spending on services throughout Russia, and specifically in the Volga Federal District, grew. And in the Central Ural and Siberian Federal Districts grew only in 2019 and 2021. And the last year, the regression analysis results for out-of-home food expenditures. If we take a look on the graph, we can see that at least one line has a positive slope. But it turned out that there was no significant linear relationship between income and spending on eating out during all 3 years. And with the growth of per capita income, again, the share of out-of-home food increased only in central federal districts. And in other districts and in Russia as a whole, there was no dependence. And here you can see the results of our research. First of all, the structure of consumption of Russian households in the regional context has undergone some changes due to COVID-19 crisis. So the answer to our main research question is yes, it has changed. Also, the share of expenditures on food and non-food products has increased almost everywhere, while changes in other expenditures are controversial. Alcohol spending has mostly decreased in the western part of the country and has not changed in the eastern part during the crisis. And of course, as a result of the crisis, the share of household spending on services and food and restaurants decreased most of all, which is quite expected since visits to these places were limited by quarantine measures. Also, we compared distributions functions for 5 categories of consumer spending and found out that they have changed in more than a half of Russia's regions in the period from 2019 to 2021. And the last but not the least, according to the Russian regional data for 2019 and 2021, the empirical confirmation of Engel's law was obtained. That's all that I wanted to say. Thank you. Now I'm ready to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Svetlana. It would be great to see you for questions. Please, questions, comments. Thank you. Please, questions. I have no questions, unfortunately, because I participate in this research more or less. So I need badly in your questions or comments and proposals.
Okay, I can start. Thank you very much, Svetlana, and all the team which contributed in this study, and it looks very nice, although I see that it lacks complicated regression analysis, but it's not always the issue, because it's more important to understand what you have and how you interpret the results. So from this point, I would maybe I would like to know more about the channels. Why do you observe the dynamics you report? So what are the reasons that, for example, you say, well, there was a mistake, of course. In your last slide, you showed food and non-food expenditures increased, but technically that's all. There are no other expenditures, only food and non-food by classification, for example, UN classification. But mainly the question is, why do you observe such dynamics?
Okay, thank you for your questions. As I said in the beginning, it has some motivation, our research under it, like the weights for the CPI calculating. And also, it is interesting just because of the data source for me, for example. On the first course, so when we have some statistical beginner course, the teacher told us about this data source, the observation of households in Russia. And I thought that it is a very big database. It is like very great. And when we were proposed to work with this database, I feel happy and interested and interested if we talk in English.
Well, the question was not about motivation. The question was, how do you explain the results? What are the reasons in observed dynamics? Why people increased food expenditures, for example?
Okay, I understand. Like people didn't have an opportunity, for example, to eat out of home or to buy some services which they are used to buy. So they like sit at home and they have nothing to do, just like increase their food consumption. So this result is quite expected.
So you have taken inflation out, and what you say is that the calories intake per person has increased during the pandemics.
Yeah, I think we didn't take into account the inflation. Yes, we just work
You
with.
didn't take, but you were talking about purchasing power parity.
In the regression analysis, yes, we did the regression analysis only on median income for purchasing power parity in 2019. So we just collect this data from Россtat and made the simple regression analysis and fully understand this inflation thing. We didn't do it. Yes.
So you can't say whether it's that people have eaten more or people paid more for the same amount, or even they paid more for the less amount of food. You can't say from your analysis.
Yes, we can say only about the share in the whole expenditures. Yes.
Yes, but
not
then,
about the amount.
Then the question remains because actually you can use inflation data per different groups of goods, and you could adjust it and see whether it was calories intake that increased during the pandemic, and we might expect healthier people because they were eating more, and or maybe there was more overweight people. Who knows? What are the consequences? But right now we don't know whether it was just resulting from inflation, simple inflation effect. Okay, so that's of course makes the contribution of the research less valuable, but nevertheless I like the way you were presenting and how neat your presentation was, very accurate, and I think that working in this direction, you would, together with other participants, you would make a pretty much publishable paper, maybe not in the leading journals, but in some economic journals that do not require regression analysis. You might contribute by understanding what is behind of the dynamics, whether it's inflation, whether it's changes in behavior of people, in their eating preferences, or in preferences to buy services online and offline. And maybe there also a statistical error that comes to the issue, because we now live in digitalized world, but statistics is very standard one. That's why quite many services could not be counted. Just because of the issue. They were not accounted because they were digitalized, that appeared just on the time of pandemics, and that's why they were not in the figures, right? So statistical error is always at present in such analysis. Okay, talking about how to improve your study, and not now discussing inflation, I would suggest that you compare the 2021 not with 2020, because it doesn't make sense. Of course, it's a recovery. Or you can say that, yes, it's a recovery and some changes happened. But it's more interesting to see to the reference point, which is 2019. So it's more interesting to see 2021 compared to 2019 in your figures.
We compared, yes, and for us it also was the main interesting point, the comparing 2021 figures and 2019, and we did it. It was on the slides.
I didn't maybe get it, that you were showing 2019 to 2020, then 2020 to 2021, and then you were showing 2019 to 2021. Was it the average over 2 years, or it was a comparison of 2021
now I understand
to
your question. Yes, it was the comparison of just 2021 and 2019 without the 2020. Yes.
Well, yes. So now we have cleared it. Then
yes, thank you.
Okay, it's clear. Also, I don't think that subfederal division of regression analysis makes sense, because you take regional data and they are meager, and that's why regressions are not reliable at all. So maybe you just keep all regions in one regression, and it will make some sense. But still, I don't think that the regression analysis is a strong side of this study. It's more valuable to explain what you see, why you see the results as they are, and not as they could be, for example, or whether they are consonant with the studies from other countries or they're completely controversial. So that would be a contribution.
Yes, I understand. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Elena Svitlana. It's a great idea, really, to perform comparative analysis with other countries. For example, with China. In China, we have a bunch of papers and different patterns of changes, for example, in the south and in the north of China. Yes, it's interesting idea. Svetlana, I think we could realize this idea. Yes. And Elena Stanislavna, which journal could you recommend? I understand, not high level, of course, but you told that it's possible try to publish these initial results. Could you recommend us which journal?
Well, just it came to my mind, Journal of Новая экономическая ассоциация, New Economic Association. Well, I think it could be if you put meat in your study, if you put explanation, then it would be reasonable. But I think there are many around, not only that one.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for this advice. Please, other questions, comments, proposals? In which direction it's possible to develop? John?
Hello. So first of all, I will say this is very intriguing and excellent as a researcher because I see you do the very beautiful the graphics. But I concentrated the graphics because maybe I miss some things because I only know maybe this is the quantity analysis because you only express some of the regions is increase, unchanged, and the decrease. Yes. But actually, we can get the end in the quantities things from the graphics. So maybe sometimes we will say if this region the price only increase one or very small. If the change is very small, sometimes we can get the more information from this because you only tell us the increase, decrease, and the unchanged, but you didn't tell us the date. I will say these things, and my other questions is also the theoretical problems because you in the last slides you say in some regions the alcohol expenditures is the decrease due to quarantine measures because they can't go to the outer and eat in the restaurants. Actually, I think it don't make sense because actually people don't only drink alcohol in the restaurant. They can buy alcohol and
I didn't tell about this. I didn't tell about it. Sorry for interruption. I said that quarantine measures affected out-of-home food expenditures. About alcohol, I didn't tell that. I just said that in the southern of Russia, I tried to explain the positive dependence between the variables. So I said that it may exist because the poorest regions produce alcohol by themselves at home. Yes.
Yes, I got it. It makes sense. Actually, I can recommend you to check the data because I see too many in the paper about the alcohol expenditures in the Russia. Actually, due to the COVID-19, maybe some countries, for example, the China in the poor regions, actually some people will increase their alcohol expenditures because they can't go out, they can't go to work, so they must stay at homes. So maybe they will increase their alcohol expenditures. I will say this is the feasible channels. Maybe you can try to find the more literature reviews and about these problems, and you can find more feasible channels to tell us what the theoretical is feasible as they're mentioned by Professor Ida Kadena. Yes. But this is, of course, this is very intriguing research. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting ideas. Please, other questions or comments or proposals? Maybe your co-authors would like to add something? No? Okay, then thank you very much, Svetlana, and I hope you continue this research in this year, and of course you can use more developed econometric tools, for example, regression, not only simple regression, and I wish you success in this research. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. If there's no other questions or comments, thank you very much to Svetlana and to all participants, and especially to Elena and Venjoy for very valuable comments. Thank you.